Conservation, he advocates for the growth of Bahamian and Caribbean art communities and the safeguarding of their cultural heritage. Oh, sorry, I heard me again. Echo. All right, for some added context, I also wanted to add a few little points before we dig in. So this is kind of to help us think about how we consider our archival material in the Bahamas generally. Just a few historical points. So first, I wanted to talk about Operation Legacy. This was a program that was initiated by the British Colonial Office, which later became the Foreign Office, that was designed to destroy or conceal files that could implicate the British Empire in wrongdoing, particularly as decolonization progressed in the 1950s, 1970s. So the goal was basically to prevent these documents from being used by former colonies. Methods included burning and dumping files at sea, with instructions given to colonial officials on how to handle sensitive documents. The program colonies in the Caribbean, Asia, and Africa. And so Krista Thompson, Bahamian historian and general force for good, we love, yes. Which I believe is required reading for all Caribbean creatives at this point. In her text, she also draws attention to the fact that a lot of the old colonial photographs that we like to look at so much, a lot of the old colonial tourism photos in particular, they were altered to project this sort of idea of the Caribbean as an unspoiled Eden, which is ironic given that so much of the landscape across the region has been scarred by plantation. Things like utility and even people, locals especially, were edited out of images to bolster the paradise myth that they were building out for tourism at the time. These are just some things I just keep in mind when we're considering any Caribbean work, to be honest, but also like this sort of time period that Cardo was like alluding to in his work, because his work is so gentle and easy to look at that I think sometimes the more sinister sort of and difficult histories that are underlying it kind of can get lost, and that's kind of part of what we're talking about here today. So, challenges around archival work in the Caribbean. I'm going to start with some practical things. So I'm going to start with you, Cardo. So what do you think, obviously, the space that we inhabit, geographically speaking, and dealing with climate crisis and everything right now, what's the most pressing environmental threats to the archives, and how are you personally sort of adapt to conservation methods, or how are you working to kind of consider these challenges for the future? I'm also thinking in terms of social landscape. So, Sonia, if you want to speak, I guess kind of like how we're thinking about socially what can and should be preserved. This is a little intro, because we're going to unpack that further in the talk. So yes, first, Cardo, environmental threats in terms of climate, and then Sonia in terms of the social landscape.
So one of the first things that comes to mind is obviously like climate change. But you know, even prior to that, just the fact that we're in a tropical environment, our humidity levels are like, you know, up there. There's moisture like in every space. So oftentimes like we have to mitigate for that. We should mitigate for that, I should say. I know at the NAGB we have dehumidifiers in spaces where, you know, AC is necessary because of the heat. You know, you have to make sure a lot of spaces are climate controlled, basically. So that's one of the main factors, specifically too, because speaking about, you know, the colonial kind of like landscape and history, you know, a lot of the practices we have now are like very European centric, right? Especially when you think of painting on campus, oil painting, paper.
To how you lay it down is kind of based on your masters and their environment that they were working in.
Exactly. And a lot of spaces also have points of high humidity, but they go through proper seasons, right? So it's not all the time that it's always cold or hot, or, you know, they
it's not the tropics.
Like, for example, like what we call stretchers here, oftentimes they're not actual stretchers, like in a traditional sense, because stretchers are made in a way where they have keys in them that you could put in throughout the year that stretches the painting, because the painting breathes. Exactly. And they are designed that way because of the changes in the season, right? Obviously, we don't experience that, so we have been afforded, you know, the opportunity to not have to use a traditional stretcher as an example of thinking of things that we have adopted but aren't traditionally, you know, connected to the region in particular. So then that's just a little bit of tidbits, but essentially the main issues that we face is the climate crisis itself, and the fact that more so a lot of the practices artists have are not necessarily practices that mesh well with our environment and our realities.
They weren't designed for that.
And basically, the environment, and that's a bigger context for, you could talk about colonization all day, right? That's a bigger conversation that alludes to that, right? Why we're having these issues with one of the bigger kind of like problems, or what's called in conservation modes of deterioration is mold, right? Mold is always going to be, it's always present.
Anybody who saw a hurricane, the aftermath of that hurricane,
exactly.
If you got flooding, anything.
And a lot of the materials we use are very susceptible to molds, eating things, taking away pigment from paintings, causing canvas to disintegrate, basically. So these are some of the threats, and it's connected again to our tropical environment, but also to the fact that we're using these European-centric means of creating, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just that, and answering your adaptability aspect, is we have to adapt.
Right.
Like, it's not a
translation.
Yes, you have to adapt ways of thinking, trying to figure out best practices for the environment. Since I've been thinking about conservation, especially as it relates to culture, because art is a part of our culture, or just creatives creating in general. I often tell visual artists in particular, think of this work 50 years from now.
While you're making it.
Yes, while you're making it. First of all, can someone invest in the house properly?
Right.
Can this be stored? Yes, exactly.
You know,
This archival. Other materials that I'm using gonna last. If you then don't, it doesn't matter. But if you're thinking of someone seeing this work, a collector being able to not look at a piece and curse because it's, oh my God, what is this made out of? Because it's falling apart, So you just think about these things in a way, and just thinking, future-proofing it. And all those things connect back to thinking about storage, how we store work, where we store work, being intentional about it, basically. So over the years, I've been championing that with a lot of artists.
I think so, because I think you naturally kind of started going that way because you're an artist yourself. So you're thinking about this from literally kind of every side. As someone who owns artwork, someone who makes artwork, someone who has to take care of artwork.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? All of it. So it's just it makes sense. And I think that it's benefited all of us to be able to have you kind of help guide us towards a lot of these sort of points that we maybe wouldn't normally think about. You know what I mean? Even I remember having in discussion with you, you were talking about I think you had a discussion with another conservator, and they were talking about something as simple as how we use rabbit skin glue on paintings and stuff. But for our environment, really what might have made more sense would be fish glue.
Yeah.
I know it can smell. Oh.
Okay. Hello. Rough choice.
Rough choice for noses. And also, again, the thing that we do is okay, you have to balance how much do you want to use natural sort of materials, because there's a certain kind of association with that, because we're also pushing authenticity and authentically Bahamian everything. And this is from this place all the time. But then, because that's also more easy to deteriorate, sometimes you have to think about using dirty, evil plastic, quote unquote. You know what I mean? It's a necessity, especially for places like this, because we're dealing with a lot more in terms of the environment than a lot of people I think have ever had to when it comes to considering artwork. So
it also takes a lot of time and a lot of money.
Yeah.
To archive your own work.
Properly.
Yeah.
Properly. Whatever, but
I try to. Can I answer the question? Are you good? Okay. I have 4 stories.
yes. Let's go.
In 2000 and I want to say 2007, I was a baby in college, at Pratt. And over the summer, I did an internship at the National Art Gallery. And our summer internship was about 4 of us. And the thing that we were tasked with, I think because they were moving towards opening the library, was we were given like a list from Dr. Erica James of Bahamian artists, some very well known and some not known very well to any of us. And we were told to choose, I think, like 6 names and to build archives of their work for the library. So I don't entirely remember the list of people. I know one of them was Roland Rose, one of them was Antonius Roberts, John Benjamin Smith. I want to say Dorman Stubbs, and then I can't remember the last 2, but so it's a long time ago. And that was really illuminating as someone who is also an artist. I mean, I'm a writer and a visual artist, and I make books of other people's work, right? So there's like these different layers going on here.
Different angles that you come at it.
Yeah, physical realm, digital realm, how those things relate, right? And the archival realm. And so it was illuminating because I got to see how artists archived their work or not, you know. And I also found out that I really liked doing that. So I like going to the newspapers and looking up, you know, seeing what I could find about these artists' work. Because, you know, they just have one file that's just like art, you know, and you just get to go through the file. And then that's never changed. Like spending a day in the archives is like amazing. It's so peaceful. And so that taught me something. And it was like, I was made aware that we had to be responsible for, as like artists, of archiving our work, photographing it. You know, back then it was like photographing. Now we're like digital photographs, but then where does that get saved to make sure? Because just a backup drive could also get corrupted. And, you know, whatever is written about you, keeping that as well, all of that, because so much of what we save is so accidental sometimes. Sometimes it isn't, like, 'cause it's very intentional, like mentioning this project Legacy, right? That's like an intentional, right? Destroying of archives. But then sometimes what endures really is just so accidental, and it's just what one
Tourism photos.
what like one person or one organization or community decides is worth saving or preserving. And it's like an effort, or sometimes a collusion, if you want to bring more like sinister things into that, around like preserving a certain narrative. So anyway, that's all to say that, you know, you need to keep yourself visible as an artist. Like, that's your responsibility, even as like women, especially. Like, I just noticed that trend, you know, like that the male artists I work with kept up their work or had significant others to do that for them.
The hidden labor.
Right. There's a lot going on with that. So that's one story. So that made an impression. Number 2, when I was also away, I volunteered at Ugly Duckling Press, which is a small press in Brooklyn, in New York. That made a really big impression on me on how I wanted to make books, right? And we talked about how their archives, they said that they always keep at least 2 of everything they make, right? Now I think of, you know, they keep more copies. So like, say if you have a run of like 100 books, or you're keeping, I would keep like a chunk, but I'm definitely always going to keep 2 of everything I make. And I do. So if you're like, do you still have, can I still see the book that I made in 2006? Yeah, I have 2 copies of that. I never sold them. I kept them, or maybe they're an artist proof or something, one of them, right? But like, and they told me at Ugly Duckling Press that they saved 2 of everything, but they didn't think about saving some in another location, so they lost a lot of stuff in a fire. And of course, when we work with like printmaking and letterpress printing, fire is the real possibility and threat. And like, I can't afford hurricane insurance, but I have fire insurance at least. But insurance is
that's
going to
what
bring back
value
like
is
the books
real.
I made, right?
Makes sense.
They just put a monetary value on it. But so I have archives in 2 different locations. And
I was going to ask that.
yeah, and I used to once a year or twice a year, once before hurricane season, once in the new year. So like in every 6 months, basically, go through and do some archiving, like housekeeping for myself, you know. Ever since I've started the press, I found that really difficult to find time. I mean, all of the photographs for the last 4 years of my life is just thrown up in a file. Like nothing is separated, and it is
Because you're
exhausting. Yeah.
Right.
But that's the second thing. That's the other story. Like these things like showed me ways to be responsible for myself like early on and for the work that I made, you know. And then boy, I had 2 more stories. I should have written the notes down like you did, Cardo.
Come back.
But the third one is now I'm like decolonizing my thinking around materials, right? And practices and book arts, because like I finished a graduate program at the University of Iowa in 2019. And that was we were so well like trained in this program, you know. But of course the materials that I've been trained to use are very difficult to get here. I mean, even just a sheet of Mohawk paper, my goodness, like just a sheet of Mohawk, let alone, you know, like Hannah Mule, Stonehenge, whatever.
But you know, you can get designer sunglasses real quick.
That's right. Or you can bring it in and pay 45% duty. Or do like hours and hours of admin if you want to apply for an exemption and beg the government for that, which again, what kind of time, where do you want to spend your time or your money? I don't
This
know.
is the social landscape we must navigate.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And so I've just been thinking more too about, does it matter?
Yeah.
I know. Like maybe this is the wrong person to like bring on the talk, but
No.
in 2020 or 2021, I was in a conference for the American Printing History Association. It was an online conference, and it was about presses in the Caribbean and in Latin America. So I presented about Poinciana Paper Press alongside the founder of La Impresora, which is a small press in Puerto Rico. And the way that she produced her work, I asked a question about archiving, or like how long does that last in her environment? And she said, like, I'm paraphrasing completely. This is Nicole Delgado, by the way. And she said, you know, it doesn't, like, I just decided to let it go because it's in like because of the realities of like she had gone through Hurricane Maria, and you know, and I think about that a lot because I really do think sometimes it doesn't matter.
There is a sort of futility, I think.
Yeah, like everything matters, but nothing matters.
Right.
And so, more and more, I'm like, because also you can use the most acid-free paper, but is your like storage acid-free? Yeah, acid-free like cardboard enclosures, but we also have a bunch of roaches and pests that want to eat the cardboard. So you're going to have to put that in a plastic gasket box to protect it from moisture and pests. That is not archival. That plastic will cause foxing in your paper and your books.
And what is
after
foxing
a
for
while?
folks who don't know?
The spotting, like that looks like rust spots on paper.
Little brown spots.
Yeah. Or if you want to keep it in a little plastic slip, well, that's got to be archival grade too. And that's expensive, and you're going to pay duty on it. So it's also like, is the collector going to do that too?
Right.
I don't know.
And how do we make these decisions?
Right. Yeah. So sometimes I think too about, like, I think my feelings around it are complicated.
I think they have to be by nature. I think if it's not complicated, then you probably haven't thought about it enough or haven't looked at it enough. There's no
It's
simple
ongoing. Yeah, it's an ongoing thing, you know.
a complex and weird thing.
Yeah, because then you bring digitization into it, which I think we'll probably talk about, but that's a whole other thing. And now with AI, like, I have a lot of concerns.
That's actually, I wanted to ask that. So, for both of you, I just want to know how much you think that digitization is a viable solution for Caribbean archives, or does it risk further erasure of material history? So for me, I'm thinking about this in the context of like AI and data farms and their environmental impact, since we are the people who are on the front line of the climate crisis. So like, if we're storing digital versions of everything in the cloud, it's not going nowhere. It's in data farms and things that use up a bunch of water, electricity, and everything else that causes us more problems later on as hurricanes, right? So like, just kind of trying to think around that. Just how do we contend with that? How have you both sort of been trying to think about this in your own practices and the work that you've been doing?
So I'm a big like futurist when it comes to like thinking about. So a lot of times when I think of how to solve a problem, I think of problems that don't exist already.
Yes.
And when it comes to
catastrophizing for the sake
like,
of, you know.
like Capricorn, you know.
Oh yeah.
But like, so when I think of like digitization, right, I often think of like, okay, we're digitizing now, but we're digitizing for ourselves. Perfect example, like at one point the USB cord was like the thing.
Right.
Right.
Floppy
Now
disks.
Right.
Yeah.
If you have something on a floppy disk, good luck.
My dad's resume.
And now it's like USB-C, and now we're getting to the point where like everything will eventually just be like cordless, right? So just thinking how fast things like are evolving. And I think of, and I'm saying this to match to like archaeologists, right? In them researching ancient civilizations, they have to dig through dirt.
Right.
Literally dig through dirt, right? We don't think about it, but they're digging through dirt. And I always, this is the point when they think of like, oh, how important is art? I'm like, they're finding art.
Literally.
Like that's literally the only thing that could identify a civilization. Like people don't think about it that way, but that's how you have to drive it home. Like when they dig up dirt,
Right.
to figure out if the civilization was advanced or not.
They check your art.
They check for pottery, which is literally art.
Right. Your creative work.
And the tools that created these things, right?
Because it shows an importance on the human.
Exactly.
Right? Which is what we kind of are supposed to have as a marker of
So
civilization.
And that being said, I bring that up because in the future, this is how I'm thinking. And not to be morbid about it, but when we're all gone and dead, hopefully
We ghosties looking down on everything.
there's
See how they,
there's no crisis that like obliterates us, right? A lot of the time in a space like this, hopefully not, but in a space like this, a lot of the archives that would exist, it's going to be digital. We're in an age where people are not like etching on stone, like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, they're texting, like people barely have conversations where it's like in something that's like set in stone. WhatsApp is encrypted across, you know what I mean? So when I think of like people looking back, if it's not stored somewhere, say a civilization that's been again obliterated or whatever, they're going to look in digital archives. So for a lot of us, our stories, our art, a lot of our culture is going to be in this kind of like digital archaeological dig, so to speak. So for me,
historians are going to be a thing.
yeah. So for me, I see a lot of future in this digital archiving of the work we do, the spaces we inhabit. I often tell people too, like, I hate when I look in the catalog and I don't see images of the curation of a space.
Right. Like,
Right.
why am I just looking at the artwork? I don't know how it was put up. Like, what are you trying to say? But, because, like, how you arrange, obviously, I'm very biased towards this because I'm a curator. I understand this. But, like, if you're not showing people, like, what the journey is really that you're trying to take someone on through a space, then, like, the work itself, like, is going to be important anyway. But, like, where's that sort of general context? You know what I mean? Like, you could place a bunch of works together on a page, and that's cool. That's can be curated in a certain sense, but is that the exhibition?
Yeah. And like, again, well, I'm hoping I'm answering your question specifically. So, but the digital aspect of this archival, I think, is a part of our future. We can't run away from it. You either adapt or get left behind.
But that's
Right?
also the thing, right? It's like you have to keep adapting, keep updating.
And also, or you detach yourself and leave that behind. Let me tell you,
That intake.
I'm hanging on by a thread to social media.
Yeah.
I really am about to be full weirdo. Like,
You know, I feel like it's anti-social media.
honestly, like, I don't know, this like the millennial journey maybe that, you know, we were raised on social media was like really idealistic and
Right.
I guess we could argue it's a way of archiving, but it's really just like a horrifying like business tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think it depends on what you use it for?
Probably,
But the system itself, right? The thing-
you're still in
kind of
this.
thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I don't know. Like again, it's like a lot of like I'm still thinking about it. But I guess my question is yes. So we want to digitize. I'm scanning all of my chapbooks that were only made by like available by hand. You know, so I have like
Right.
chapbooks that I made an edition of 100 copies or something, and that are definitely sold out, quote unquote, or out of print, let's say. And I'm building on my press website a section where one could go visit and flip through, like digitally, the scans of the chapbooks. And again, like this is totally biting off of Ugly Duckling Press because they have this on their website for all of their out of print books.
Or is it just sharing resources and good ways of doing things?
And I'm like, this makes so much sense. You know, I was like, what am I going to do with downloadable PDF? But I guess there's like a plugin for everything now. But I get not exactly like, I get nervous because I think like the question for me around digitization is like, after you digitize it, like, how is it being accessed?
How do you access that?
That's my question. Because I think if you had asked me like 4 or 5 years ago, you know, I'm a really big believer in open access. Like I think about how, you know, when you're writing papers in school and you have access to like JSTOR, you can access so much, but at the same time, articles like man, the Bahamas handbook, you guys, those articles are like fire. Like they are so legit. And you have to go to the book.
Right.
You know, like, and what would it be like if that was accessible to students who are in like Canada and can't like get the Bahamas handbook from 1982 or whatever, right? For that like really jamming piece on, I don't know, take your pick. The flags of the different islands. Remember we did that when Lawrence was doing, if we found this bomb ass article. Yes, for each island. And we found like this bomb ass article about it in the Bahamas handbook in one of them. Anyway, but
that's one of the reasons.
But I want to say though that now I don't know how I feel about that.
Right.
Like I feel nervous about like the amount of access that we have to each other in general, like in daily life and our lives. And also with AI essentially stealing whatever is shared online, what is my work going to be accessed for?
Right. You can.
Seriously, does anyone know? Because I don't know. I'm freaked out. I think that's not okay. I'm not like exactly freaked out, but I'm kind of like, you know, like I'm kind of like annoyed by it, you know, because.
But it's my point is that you can't fight it.
I guess, or you can though.
Yeah, you can. You can
have access to yourself.
Yeah, you can by not uploading anything and being a hermit and doing all these things.
Yeah,
but
you know, it worked. It worked for a lot of artists and writers throughout history.
Yeah.
The older I get, the more I understand Jack Gilbert. Let me tell you something.
Yeah.
He went into the mountains and he continued to write the most amazing poetry. He was just by himself in his business. I think about that a lot.
There's a piece that you get, I think, sometimes that I think creatives generally need. That we need for making, but also for having time to archive our things.
Yeah.
Period.
I know one of the, and when I'm saying like, I think digitalization is the future. It's not that we should like do away with like putting things in books and stuff. It's just another mode of like,
it should be a
thinking about access. Yeah, thinking about access, thinking about there being another way to kind of archive these things, right? And also thinking about future generations.
Right, so they don't just set up, because like archiving is important, but also only if it can be engaged with. And really kind of.
And thinking about access in different ways, because not everybody is going to go to a book. And not, to your point, not everybody has access to a book, but people have access to a phone and the internet.
Right.
So it's
I mean,
like,
mostly.
yeah, mostly, yeah. So
For now.
Right.
and
Wait until like all these Starlinks take over and then they just get shut off.
I already saw the SpaceX.
Okay.
but
What are the mild
thinking-
catastrophizing? Here it is. The
Thinking
internet is
about-
only available because these
Things
like companies and organizations make it available for now.
Right.
Anyway, just saying.
No, that's real though. That's real. It's going. It can come back. Anyway, so kind of shifting a little bit again, beyond like official institutions, what kind of grassroots or personal archival efforts are filling in gaps in our historical preservation? Are there any resources that you found particularly useful that you'd like to share? So like I'm thinking about here with this sort of question, the way that like Tamika Galanis has talked before about how like Instagram is an archive for people, you know what I mean? And like things like that. So I was just like, trying to think about all these other ways that we can kind of, when the historical record is both lacking and perhaps not necessarily the most truthful, how do we look to other forms of archive to kind of like fill in things for ourselves and fill in our narrative, I guess, in a certain sense? Like, is there anything that you feel you've been like looking to that's really like particularly useful, or where you find inspiration? Like, is it oral histories? You know what I mean? From someone's grandma. Just basically like, what do you consider alternative forms of archiving outside of what we think of a traditional archive to be?
Well, I know for our space in the region, a lot of oral archives like exist, and like having to do the cultural work of speaking, having conversations, and from those conversations,
Transcribing.
yeah, literally. I know a lot of, the earlier work that Erica James did at NHGB that was a big part of it. Like actually speaking to people,
Right.
Understanding their story. Again, transcribing and writing their stories down, like archiving.
And then choosing what was worthy of continuing to be like sort of engaged with that way and what wasn't, which is also like a big thing, big deal.
Mm-hmm. A lot of
Power in archives, colonial power, institutions.
Yep. A lot of the work that, and I'm gonna hit myself because I'm like forgetting her name now. That's the first chairman of the NHGB board,
Gail Saunders.
Dr. Gail Saunders. A lot of the work that she did was sieving through newspapers.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the record keeping of her time was that if it wasn't in the newspaper, it was not real. Like,
And even then,
it was not like documented. So a lot of the stuff that she researched about the Bahamas, the history, she had to basically corroborate with the newspaper in a lot of ways to give it this sense of like, oh, this was real, this happened. Here's the
original social media,
right? So in terms of like archiving in that way, I feel like again a big part of our history is like the oral transcribing of people's stories, because we even live in a society now, like as a millennial, like I prefer someone to email me or text me, right? And
because
I
of
think
aforementioned access, unlimited access to everybody else.
yeah, but not just that. For me, it's like my brain has so much things, the information. I'm so dense with information, and people are so used to things happening so quickly now because of the access that for me, I need a record. Like I need something to know that, oh, I had this conversation. This wasn't a dream, But you oftentimes have the generational like gaps between how you communicate with people. Like for instance, like my dad would prefer a call than a text, right? It's sometimes you can text him, and I'm just using him as an example. Sometimes you text him, you would be like, he would prefer a call if he wants to talk to you, it feels more personal, right? But for me, I like the text because a lot until next week. Clean archive. What does it mean? Like, how do I feel like changes as well the conversation? But I feel like versus like us being in the middle, this is the beginning of these is now.
Yeah, we're kind of placed.
Yes. Yeah.
Normal digital, I'm gonna say analog. Really goes out there. That's why I'm like, I really don't like TV.
I just wanted to I wanted to jump on the WhatsApp and because you know our published correspondence from like famous writers with their ones, and it's like yeah, like so it's like publish a WhatsApp conversation. You know,
Well, I would say it has to be
yes.
so
Because you have an agreement with someone in life that if something happens to you tragically, that they don't take any phone, you know, yeah, just right off of the PF bridge because like no one needs to know everything. You know, but that correspondence, I mean, that is an interesting quote unquote archive, you know, like um 10 years ago. Sometimes I would exchange like emoji poems with a friend of mine soon just for fun, but think about it like a fun exchange. One would send a string of emojis and send a poem back that would respond. Emojis. I love them so much. Go back and get them. It's a 20 whatever. Anyway.
But I just want to know if you kept damage because you're also living like pre and post.
And I think like when we talk about in terms of like what are the what could consider, you know, I also think that like community archiving is really cool. Some things only persist because he really believes in it. It's behind a family, like a family community, or just like an art space, a space of activism or something, decides to elevate it, make it visible, preserve it, keep it going, and whatever form that might take, you know. So, like right now, I'm thinking about at the press. We work with Equality Bahamas, the human rights organization, quite a bit, and I have a gallery space. Yeah, gallery. It's a hallway. I have a hallway. Pick up press. Yeah. And whenever we do something together, like we have a public art creation event. So we make CDs, for example, or we make block prints, or we make letterpress printed posters, or protest posters for the Women's March, or around like certain events or movements, you know, which either might be local and or global at the same time. I put them up in the gallery, and they're there for, you know, a couple of months. And I feel like that's archiving.
It is,
you know, because I'm putting it up there, creating a context around it,
Right, so
explaining our creative decisions behind it, or our thinking behind it. And it's a bunch of people coming together. The letterpress posters that we did, we asked people what more y'all want.
right.
40 people created responses, and that's like a response to a moment.
It was an archive of collective community action,
Yeah.
which is a beautiful thing. And we don't necessarily always have like a kind of record of unless
Yeah.
it's like in the paper.
And
You know
it
what I mean?
happens organically. So
Right.
we'll do it in tandem with the event usually.
Mhm.
So if we're creating these posters
That's
or we're
how you
creating these
document the event.
zines, we just, we make the person makes the zine. I show people how to make a zine. They make their zine, photocopy it, photocopy a couple so they could have like 10 or whatever. And we photocopy one and put it on the wall. I mean, it's a zine, so I have magnets. I don't know how to use, I know how to use a drill, but I'm not really, like Richardo is
We don't know how to use letterpress.
PhD
You're good.
drill level, and I'm not that
Who
kind
here
of
knows how to use
curator.
letterpress, Sonia?
Right.
all have special
I
skills.
use magnets and a magnet board for the gallery. It's great. It means things can also be just like organic and so
Living archive then. In a certain
Yeah.
sense, like your gallery space
Yeah.
becomes like a kind of, like
the
a
next step
living
is
library.
to actually take all of the photographs I've done
Yeah.
and put them on the press website. That would have to be like the clone of me.
It's because
doing my
archiving
admin.
is a job.
Yeah, yeah.
And we keep not looking at it as an intentional job. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of what I'm also trying to get at with this. It's because it's work. It's necessary work, especially in spaces like this. A lot of people tell us who we are, how we are, and what we should be. And it's like, how do you sort of self-identify and how do you like realize as someone outside of it? In this
Yeah.
case, like,
And I think too, like stressing the importance of building intentionally, like your family archive.
absolutely. I have friends who don't have
especially-
baby photos anymore.
Well,
You know what I
yeah,
mean?
it's
Like-
tough. Like I think I don't have a lot of printed photos since, like Facebook was beginning,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So college days are 20 years. And I'm like, sometimes I'm like, should I be worried about this?
Right.
I don't know. But then those all go, yeah,
Because everything shifts and transitions.
just things to think about because I think like, and it shouldn't just fall to like one family member, but I guess it usually
It
does.
often
But
is.
it can be a really like rewarding thing to make sure that you keep your family's archive together because like
It's the story
that
keeper of the
it's
family.
it takes this collective of all of our like relational histories to create an accurate picture, like a people's picture of history. Like
Right.
it's not just like these like fantastic individuals who made history in this way and we're keeping their letters
Right.
in the Department of Archives.
Because someone said they
There's
were
a lot
important.
of right because someone said they're important, but really like history happens on this like interpersonal, quiet family level. So much is erased from what endures in the archives is such a fraction of like the human experience. So
Right.
to think
Right.
about like archiving beyond what we think of like, yes, the colonial official way of like, what is archiving, going to the archives and the special collections. And instead it's just about being present in your like heritage, your family history.
Mhm.
That's a beautiful thing.
That's beautiful.
And then you're
like-
actively part of it.
Like cultural knowledge,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Like who told you, before we had like weather forecast that a hurricane is coming. That was knowledge passed down from families to be like, hey,
Bush medicine.
yeah, you see this thing, like be aware that a storm is coming. We take it for granted, like simple things like seeing a rain cloud,
Right.
right? But who knew that?
Or feeling like that drop when you know it's about to rain kind of thing. And like when you see like at the start of summer when it's like, okay, now we're starting to get showers, it's starting to rain again, we're getting some activity again. It's like you can kind of tell like when things start to pick up and like you have a different understanding of seasons, which we don't have in the same way because we're not as outside. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's
Those
like
are the
building like a relational awareness through self-awareness. But I think that like archives, I mean, there's like a surface level of archives and then there's like a deeper level of archives, right? And like the surface is like the pretty photographs and the
Right.
deeper level is like who
Who wrote this?
is creating the lens
Mhm.
and who decided that something was worth and who is being erased versus what is being upheld and how is exceptionalism part of the archival narrative.
Mhm. I like that.
Whereas if you
What about the mundane
have
ways?
this like the community archive keeping or family or something, you're opening it with this dialogue up to like really reckoning with
Mhm.
trauma
Mhm.
and making space for healing and creating or not creating exactly, but I don't know what the right word is, but it's sort of like owning your narrative,
Mhm.
which is really helpful for people.
Yes. Yes.
when they have a space to actually like own their narrative and then to like see themselves among a collective. But we're really, really individually focused, you know, these days.
Which is why the work you're doing with like Equality Bahamas is so important. We should have more like collective kind of organizing and crowdsourcing kind of this information so that we can maybe start to sort of trust like what the ideas that the community was thinking at that time, at least, even if they're like a niche part of the community, you know what I mean? Instead of relying on like singular narratives from people. It's like we need the mosaic of everything.
Yeah.
Like, and that's the thing. That's why I want
And to
everybody
give space to that.
Right, exactly. So like everybody should consider themselves their own archivist for their own stories, and also they should consider themselves part of our greater story and wanting to kind of preserve that. And like our interactions, like right now, you know what I mean? Like conversations we have all the time that have like helped shape my practice, your practice, your practice. Like that's an archive in itself, and that's a community archive to me. You know, that kind of collective knowledge and that oral history. Because we end up like we'll talk to younger artists, like Cardo was saying, and like we pass that down as an oral history. I mean, like all of this is significant, and it's just like you're saying. Like I just enjoy the sort of idea of taking it out of that individual kind of moment. Like you have your individual responsibility, but thinking about it in terms of you with everyone. You know what I mean? Because it only matters in relation to everyone.
Yeah, like look up from your phones.
Yes. Also true as well. So I guess my next question is, considering the questionable veracity and truthfulness of our archive, or our archives generally within the region, do you think that Caribbean artists are obliged to deal with this history or not?
Are obliged, say that again.
To deal with the difficulties of the history or not? Because I mean, this is what we have to go on, right? It's like our personal experiences and then the history that we get told, right? So do you think that we have an obligation as people from the Caribbean to engage with that, or?
Obligation is a strong word.
It is. And I mean it as that, though. That's the thing. It's like, because it's a weighty history, like,
Yeah, I
we
mean,
have to or we don't.
the questionable, you could question like the purpose of art till the cows.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That being said, there's I can't remember the guy, but he did this quote that he said that artists exist on the kind of the perimeters of society, if that makes sense.
Because we're observers, and to
Yeah.
observe, you have to be
So,
on the fringe a little bit,
and
right?
this is not to downplay other kind of like positions in society, but most of the creatives exist on the outskirts because we're the ones who take like a lot of like this critical approach to society. So we're the ones that are oftentimes on the perimeter because we're so far removed from.
Or in your own world.
Yeah, in your own world. That being said, because we're on the perimeter, if you think of the perimeter as like a village, right? If you're on the perimeter, you're basically you're like a watchman, right? And in a lot of ways, because you're on this
You're like a
perimeter,
scout.
yeah, stay with me. Yeah, you're a scout. So you're able to see beyond the perimeter that people don't want to be near. Like they want to stay in the comfort area of society for the most part, right? Because it's nice.
It's nice to belong.
It's nice.
Not that all artists are outcasts, but
you know,
generally a lot of us in some way.
Yeah.
Because of that, right?
So that being said, because of that, you're oftentimes the artwork, and that's why artwork is always evolving because you're always thinking of these things that people generally don't want to think about.
Right.
Why is this a problem? Why is our society like this? And that comes out in the art. All that to say, I feel like the more an artist creates work and you're honest, your environment kind of like it will influence your work. So that's why I said obligation is a strong word because
it's more inevitable to you.
Yeah, I feel like it's inevitable as opposed to like, and again, I'm using an example like an artist like trying to find me into their work, so they just like paint about this thing.
Oh yeah, it's very like ironically ego-driven at first, but it's about ego and trying to figure out your place within everybody. I feel like, in a lot of ways.
So I feel like it will naturally come out, whether that's like you protesting a certain genre of artwork. You know, when you think about the expressionist movement,
right?
You know, where they kind of like were anti like this whole romanticizing of the landscape and everything, you know, even if it's just in practical
collective
terms.
organizing, collective archives, and people who work together. Yep.
So I think it happens naturally. Another point that I would bring out that I've discussed before in like, you know, casual conversation is the fact that a lot of people look at the world and problems from their perspective, right?
Because
So oftentimes, because we've already experienced this thing, we've already gotten what we want from it. We don't want to hear about it anymore.
Right.
Like, forget it.
it's like I'm making work, don't let me deal with that.
Yeah, we
I'm
don't want to
making
have
money, don't
this
make me deal with that.
conversation anymore. But I always tell people these conversations and this kind of like obligation, I guess you speak of, to speak about these things is always going to be a cycle because you're going to have children. And these children are going to discover these things. If they exist, they're going to discover it. They're going to investigate it and they're going to bring it up again. The only way you could obliterate any conversation or this obligation to speak to these things is to get rid of it completely. So I always tell people, like, I look at my son. At some point, my son is going to grow up. He's going to find a book. And in that book, he's going to discover some atrocity, some knowledge, or something positive.
I mean, if he watches the news, unfortunately.
Yeah, so he's going to engage it, right? He's going to speak about it. He's going to, and this conversation in particular, I could reference like our colonial past. A lot of times people are tired of hearing of it, and I say,
As if they don't live it.
yeah, but I say the reason why it keeps coming up is the same kind of thing. Like
Right.
you have younger generations that have been barred
Right.
from learning about it. So when they discover it,
Or
it's
only
like
given a
this.
certain
It's like this weird bit on my life. So they're gonna make a big deal about it. So it's gonna constantly come up in conversation. So that's like, so that's why I feel like,
The inevitability.
obligation
It's
is a
inevitability,
strong
right?
word. It's inevitable. Like it's going to happen, whether you want to or not. Like I get
gonna
tired
pop
of
up
hearing about it at one point. It's still gonna, come up. So I do agree that it's an obligation, but my perspective is that it's going to happen, whether it's obligatory or not.
Because it's your history, so you can't not. Kind of
Yeah,
thing.
at some point it's going to come up. Where, like I said, whether you engage it or not, someone else is going to engage it.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Even if you avoid it, something will bring it up.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
All art is political.
Facts.
Yeah, that's
Simply put.
We're coming
Thank
at it
you.
from some sort of positionality and we're reckoning with something, again, from our positionality, whether we're aware of it or not. Like, even if we're painting like an idyllic family island scene, we're removing the cell towers and the telephone lines. That's a political
Right.
decision. Or the shirt, right?
Right.
Intellectual
Right.
Jezebel. Which was made based on an internet troll comment on our work through Bahamas. And we were like,
hilarious.
we are intellectual Jezebels and we're going to make
It's when they
t-shirts.
call money by accident. That's my favorite.
Archiving.
I love that.
Everything is archiving.
Archiving would make it cute.
Yeah, I feel an obligation for sure.
I feel like, especially because of your position here, that's why your work is so successful to me. It's because you don't shy away from that.
Thank
And
you.
you haven't.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think for sure a lot of people probably in this audience would say I'm very confrontational.
I feel like honesty gets seen that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And then when you're a woman, it's even better.
I know.
It's
How dare we have an
even
opinion?
uglier.
You intellectual Jezebel.
Yeah.
To bring it up.
And yeah, I mean, like making art is just like Richardo, what you're saying, right? It's like just making art is just a way of processing the world.
And culture.
And
all of it.
right. And so what we create is the way that we process the world. And so through what I make, I reckon with, I mean, really, I'm very interested in the undercurrent of violence in our colonial history and erasure, which is why I so often utilize the poetic form of erasure on historical texts. And it's a way, like, that is the way that through, like, oftentimes the white male voice that has been platformed as like the historian in the archives.
Colonial voice.
Right. So how do, if I then create an intervention in this text, how can I create like an opening between like then and now, past and present? Because also I don't really see history as a linear occurrence, because it isn't. And so when we say like past and present, it doesn't really make sense to me, because everything that we've reckoned with in the past, we're still reckoning with, because we haven't resolved anything. You know,
Time
we've
collapses in the
just
Caribbean is such a weird.
right. So I mean, even like just the names of streets, just the way that we conduct our politics, the way that we build our systems, it's all based in like, you know, indenture and slavery and everything, and violence. And I disassociate the day a lot, because if I really think about it for too long, because I just sometimes I get very frustrated, and I'm like, why can't people see how all of this is connected?
Right.
You know, like nothing,
The pattern recognition.
nothing is separate. Like climate injustice that is going on is related to like historical injustices. So, okay, so I'm going to give you an example. So when I just did my artist talk at the National Art Gallery last month, and had a conversation with someone privately afterwards, right, where we talked about, I'm creating a replica through pulp painting of a coral diorama that exists at the American Museum of Natural History. The coral is 40 tons of coral that was removed from our oceans in 20 years ago.
Yep.
So it was removed from the Great Andros Barrier Reef, right?
Which is the third largest reef in the world.
Right. And you can go see it. It's at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, still available to see. Unlike the Field Museum's diorama, by the way, which was 30 more tons of coral taken from between Honeymoon Island and Rose Island after that, with the same people, same machine. That's private. You have to make an appointment to see that now. But you can go see it. And it's interesting when you go and see it. It's like awe-inducing, right? Because
Presentation, what it is.
the Elkhorn coral is like 3 people high. I mean, you know, you could never see that in my lifetime.
No.
And it's quite amazing, right? And there's a conversation to be had there where it's like, well, yeah, it was terrible, but at least we could still see it, because I guess if it had been in the oceans, it would all be dead now, because of course we have a coral extinction crisis going on.
But if we didn't have no reefs, then we'd also all
right. They both come out of the same conditions, and the conditions, right, are that we are a place in the world that has been constantly exploited. Our environment, our people, our labor, our everything has been exploited. And so, you know, we wouldn't have to be having this conversation about like whether it's okay or not, or it all ended up okay, because at least we could see it. Like, well, at least the last extinct panda on Earth, we could like go visit in a zoo. But we don't want to just question the fact that the conditions all created all of these realities, right? So that's my example.
We didn't create that.
Right.
We didn't create that.
So that's my example, is that I just, I make work that tries to like collapse timelines. Like, what does a pamphlet on jellyfish from 1906 have to do with women's rights today? Well, it's called Medusae. So let's start there, right? And like the scientific language that we've chosen to talk about this. And it's, by the way, jellyfish populations in the Bahamas. And so I want to have a conversation about that. I want to relate these things, and I want to collapse them, and I'm going to do that through poetic erasure and
that
collage.
Relevant right. For people, it gives people a way in.
Yeah,
that's the other thing.
Because that's like, I don't know what else I'm doing. There's nothing else for me to do, like, but make that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I feel like you act as like actually both of you, I feel like you act as like a conduit or a guide for a lot of people and how to engage with a lot of this stuff, which is also what here. Just that. Right, so I'm gonna end on this question. I have it written as, how can archives become sites of healing? But I want to ask if you have had an experience where an archive has been a sort of space or a site of healing for you, or if it has that capacity. For me, there's like, you know, the sort of very, very basic thing of like family archives, when you see like old photos of your family as far back as they can go, you know what I mean? Like knowing I can see a photo of like my old Jamaican great-great-grandfather, you know what I mean? Like that helps me figure out who I am as a person in the sort of positioning that I have. That helps me feel like I have a claim to certain things that I've always felt, you know what I mean? I think there's potential there, but it's just, again, it's just kind of, I think, difficult sometimes dealing with the sort of wider public archives because of all the erasure and editing that has happened. But I think every now and then you come across something in someone who was thinking the same way as you, right? Because we're not the first people to think like us, right? We have ancestors who would have thought like us, other people in the community who would have thought like us, and I think that there's something about even coming across like a letter from someone that you resonate with, you know what I mean? Like there's something in that, I think. It's that, like how you were doing with the jellyfish, just trying to find that other tie-in that makes the thing make more sense and gives it a new context and gives us a new way to kind of think about it and consider it instead of taking it as like, this just exists and is static and we should take it as truth. You know what I mean? Like, also even like understanding, I think from when I was like working at the museum, that there are works that are like old, and they're basically just like some guy was just copying and making a bunch of copies of the same painting. You know what I mean? To sell a bunch of. I know. I know we can. I know. But no. There's just something about like, you know, if we see like an old watercolor from, I don't know, let's say like 1900, right?
Yeah.
But then you think like, oh, that's so old, it's so nice. We don't get to see that many paintings from that old, right? From that sort of era. And then you find out that there's like 20, 30 of them. And suddenly it's like, oh, he just painted a bunch of those to like, you know, it's like.
Yeah.
Addition. It's an addition.
It's an addition.
Yeah, it is
A tourist addition.
But, yeah, I don't know. I feel like.
Also, the archive doesn't have to be a site of healing.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just difficult. We just find ways to live with it like everything else.
For me, like I feel like the healing or joy or whatever that comes from like the work I do in general
Right.
is connected to the artwork,
Mhm.
but I don't think it's connected to one particular artwork
Mhm.
per se or a group
A
of
particular
artwork. Like
It's just the act of doing it yourself.
Yeah,
That is
'cause
the
then-
healing, is working with.
yeah, because in conservation, especially I mean, you could apply this to like all conservation, but in particularly art, right? What's the acronym? Like I change around the acronym for us. Like we think of it like CPR because we always resuscitate something as opposed to like being proactive. Like
Right.
so CPR. What I mean by CPR, so we do like we go from the conservation.
Right.
Oh, we gotta conserve this thing because it's falling apart, right? Then we go to like, oh yeah, now we gotta preserve this thing that we already was conserving, right? And but it's too far gone now, so just tear it down and make a new one, restore it, right? When we're supposed to be doing the kind of like if you jumble up the first two, we're supposed to preserve this thing,
Right.
this thing that already exists in a good state right now.
Like be healthy, try not to get
Preserve it.
surgery.
And preservation is trying to be proactive, right? And again, this is all me thinking of the joy in like the work. So preserve this thing, and that's being proactive, thinking about, as we talked about first, the material you're using, where it's going. Do you want this to last? Do you don't want it to last? All these conversations.
Should it?
Yeah, should it last? Like these are the conversations you need to have, like as an artist practitioner within yourself, right? And then proceed. So preservation is being proactive. Conservation is like, hey, everything we try everything, and now we gotta try and conserve this thing. And conservation is usually around thinking of being ethical about because it's restoration, but it's being more ethical about your restoration, right? It's thinking about, hey, I want this piece to be connected to its former glory,
Right.
but does that mean that I'm going to like rip it apart and like put new materials in
Exactly. Does that mean your intervention is part of that work for the
Exactly.
rest of time forever?
Exactly. Like for an example, like you could have a painting that's like old, but the oldness kind of like is
The thing.
the thing to it, right? And say the frame.
Some things look good with the yellow varnish.
Yeah, the wear and the beat up on the frame is like bad. Like it's an ugly frame.
But it looks like it lived.
No, but not just that. It's like this is the original frame.
Right.
So that gives it this level of value. So when you think of conservation, you think of that way, right? And then restoration is more so like very much connected to, I know oftentimes like restoration, conservation, and preservation all jumped up together. So oftentimes when people think of conservation, they're actually thinking about restoration. They want this thing to look exactly as it did 15 years ago, right? And usually when you take that approach, it's more so, not all the time, but it's more so from the commercial approach. It's more so like, how much money can I get from this thing?
Also, I
Hey, the
think
Bahamas ain't as glorious, but how can we paint it, back in the day as this paradise?
right. It's like we need this to look unspoiled and untouched. Like you could just come and colonize this yourself. Move that man out of the way. There we
Yeah.
go. Like,
So when I think about the joy I get is actually deconstructing that, helping, I guess, artists. Yeah, helping artists and people to just, because people know it, it's just that they don't have, a lot of people don't have the frameworks around it. Like, they know, like, this thing is bad, but because there's no rule to say that it's bad, you're questioning it. You know what I mean? Or you're supposed to do this thing, or this thing feels natural.
the default is this.
Exactly.
But also it's questionable.
Exactly. And that ties back to the work I do in the museum and the personal work I do with art, like speaking to people, as simple as like not having a painting across from your window.
Right. So that the sun doesn't damage it.
Just a simple stuff like that I take joy in, like at the museum. Like, I again pull it up because I'm biased, because it's supposed to be research first, but I'm like collect.
Yeah.
But I put collect is number one, and then research or collect and present. So
there's also all this information you already have.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the thing.
Present, preserve, research.
Right. Because the collect is the safeguarding, really. That's what you're actually talking about. Like, let's just safeguard this. We can figure out all the inner workings of it after. We need to safeguard that.
But guess what's the one thing that will, like, everything falls apart if you miss that one thing? You could miss research, you could miss collect, you could miss present, but if you don't actually preserve, everything falls apart.
Right.
Literally, archaeologists will be digging for nothing. You know what I mean? So,
like that scene in Mr. Bean with like the painting that's like painted wrong because someone restored it and it's just
yes,
right. Like
literally,
that's the first thing that comes to mind. Right?
Yeah, literally that. So like, I found now like a lot of the joy, like I get, is from the work. Like being able to, because we take it for granted, being able to walk in someone's home and see a painting that they took care of,
right?
Because they had it, hung or properly, whatever, or going into a museum. I get the joy from that, if that makes sense. So that's why I say it's not necessarily connected to any particular work, because the work owns us. We don't own the work.
Honestly,
the work is like we're literally in a lot of ways the slaves to the culture. In a lot of
servants.
Yeah, servants.
In service too.
Yeah, they're like yeah. Sorry.
Come on, you can.
But it's service too. So like a lot of times that's where I get the joy from.
Absolutely.
From that work. From being able to like sit here and see a candle.
It's caretaking.
You know what I mean?
And it's also thinking about the future. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sonia, for you.
So setting aside that like archival spaces of special collections, departments of archives, right, are like sites of like recordings of atrocities, and that they can be very triggering for people. At the same time, there is a lot of real magic in these spaces. When you spend time in them and you're either researching or you're just open to what you have to find, or you have a few things, you're turning over in your head. And then you just find like that letter, or you find like, like I said, like this strange pamphlet, and suddenly it's inspiring something, like a creative work, or it's supporting your research, or it's illuminating like another perspective on a mainstream narrative, and you get to just like be witness to that is really cool. But also I'm thinking a lot about how when I was at the University of Iowa, part of our education was to engage regularly with their special collections. And that was so cool. Yeah, I didn't really understand how important that would be, or how formative that would be. And I think especially as a person who creates artist books, like limited editions of things that are like under 100 copies, or really my like really involved artist books like A True and Exact History or The Red Thread Cycle are just like 20 copies, right? And, you know, if you're in that field, you're working with special collections to get your books into these spaces.
Right.
And when we this was something I thought about, but I didn't say earlier when we were talking about how do we like archive our work, you know, and one of the ways is I try to get my work into these special collections around the world too, because if I go under with my like 2 copies or whatever, like the Senate Library has a copy of all my chapbooks in London, or like, you know, University of Iowa has my, or you know what I'm saying? So I think it's, I think that that's something too, is also I think to think about what happens to your papers or your archives when you pass away, especially if you don't plan to have any children, you know, who do you trust with that? But getting back to the special collections, like they're just really, really cool. And I remember once I was in a zines like study, so cool, and we were the mimeograph revolution, which is like a proliferation of small presses in the 60s and the 70s in the US, which I knew a lot about before. And when we went to special collections, we could actually see the chapbooks and the zines by these small presses that I had loved for like many years, you know, and had researched and known about. That was really cool, you know, to be able to like hold the original like mimeographed chapbook, you know, with Diane DePrimo or something like that. It was really cool, and see how the communities operated, and then some of their like internal jokes too. That was really cool. I love a correspondence. You can find out a lot. Like the research that I'm doing now on the American Museum of Natural History, the coral that was pillaged from our oceans, like that correspondence is lit. Very, very interesting.
You reading WhatsApp messages?
I read in, no, I'm reading what we talked about, like making sure that everything has a record, right? Like everyone wrote their letters. Yeah, I love that.
There's an archive. You probably won't have access to it.
Yeah, that's interesting too.
In government house, where there's like correspondence that they've kept from, you know, and it's interesting.
Wild.
I only got a glimpse because I had to check some things, and it was just like
that's left after.
literally conversations between, because that was the way you got things done, right?
Yes, this was the way you had the record, and everyone had a copy, and you know all of that. Yeah, there's something else I wanted to add to. Might come back the thought. Sorry, got sidetracked with the government house thing, which was very exciting.
No, honestly, that is the thing, especially again in the context of things like Operation Legacy, where so many things got like, you know, kind of destroyed. It's just interesting to see like what is there, like what will be left. Interesting. Anyway, so I think that's all I have time for questions. If anybody from the audience has any questions, all right. Thanks, Joy. Do you need mine?
Good evening. So 2 unrelated questions. So one, and I'm speaking as a professor at UB, just noticing my students. I've come to the conclusion that, like I'm from a generation where you would back things up by taking a photograph. I'm finding that the physical object now is the backup. Like the actual digital thing is the currency. And if you actually like wrap your brain around that a little bit and watch people maneuver in especially art spaces, it makes sense, and it changes the way you kind of treat the artwork, or the way you watch, in my instance, watch young artists treat their work. So just something to reflect on. But since we were talking about archives in the Caribbean, I was wondering also if you'd come across anybody. Archiving is so specific and so difficult. Have you come across anybody, institution or person, who's doing it correctly?
I'm wondering if there's like a correct way to do it here, because this is like also kind of the thing that's been like underlying this for me is like, and for a lot of people, a lot of institutions, museums, everybody's been having conversations around like, to what extent do we save and put money into preserving like racist things? You know what I mean? Like just to be really blunt about it. So like, I don't know. I don't have like an answer.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of like buzzword for me is correct. Like, what is the correct way? Because you could say the European way is the correct way, or in terms of like how we go about. Because earlier we were talking about how do we archive? Is oral archiving, something that's viable? And the modes between like archiving. But like I mentioned, like I think you were here, like you, Heine, you were here for that. In terms of the correct way, in terms of like thinking about conservation, the way I know it's supposed to do is like when you like research is the main thing in terms of like researching what is viable to like archive, like what is the thing that needs time and energy, because at the end of the day, that's what's being used. It's someone's time, energy, resources to research this thing. So that's first, you research this thing or research whatever it is, and then you go into this mode of presentation. So I'm speaking from a museum context, right? So you present this thing that you would research, right? And in this presentation, you have a mode of, again, preservation, right? And in this preservation, you go into, okay, let's collect this thing. So in a lot, I feel like that's kind of like the academic way of thinking of the right way. I don't know if that answers.
I mean, it does. I think locally, I see Ms. Davies is there. Like I use her book as a textbook.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And Tessa's next to me is bringing up a good point that private archives, like it falls, the responsibility falls on like private, and DAF as well, I'm guessing. And I just want to know, like regionally, if there was anything else, anybody else that you look at, because I think like part of the things of digitizing everything is to make information available, like is to track down your peers in the region. And have you come? I struggle with this. I genuinely do. Have you come across anybody that you're like, oh, I can see a 20-year history, a 20-year equivalent of like pop-up studios in Jamaica or Bermuda or something that I can like get a full picture of. No, I haven't seen that. Okay.
In that sense for me, but I'm going to pass this on because I know you want to potentially say something too. You don't? You good? Okay.
I mean, but just the story of Ugly Duckling Press from earlier, like that was, I don't know I don't know if I'm doing anything right at all. I don't think so. Because,
anybody?
But that was, we had spoken about that earlier. We also talked about, like the artist can only take something so far, because you could have like a perfectly like acid-free piece of paper that then gets stored in like horrific conditions. And of course it's going to look like garbage. So what can you do?
I feel like in terms of something that I think is functional and accessible and has like a ton of information that's really well interpreted, unconventional maybe, the Know Your Caribbean podcast. Because like Fiona just is digging into so many things, and like she's really properly like unpacking and sharing a lot of these, like especially like old colonial like travel logs and things, and like books like Richard Liggins' A True and Exact Barbados, History of Barbados, and The Land of the Pink Pearl for here. Like there's a lot of things that I feel like I've come across specifically because I tuned into the podcast. Just like it's such a, for me, I feel like the sort of pan-Caribbean, or at least pan-Anglo-Caribbean, because we have linguistic silos, right? But the way she deals with like the Anglo-Caribbean and like a lot of that history and is sharing it, and it's making like the titles and like where you can find it and all these things like well known because she has so much access like in the UK. I think that's a big deal, and I think that's one way that I think someone is kind of trying to make. If anything, I think maybe the success of an archive in part is being able to have it be accessible and used by people, and have people find the importance in it. And I think for me, maybe that's what that is. Thanks for the question. Anybody else have any questions, comments?
Hi, thank you so much for this conversation. So I have a question that really applies to all three of you, but it's tailored to your individual practices. So Richardo, I wondered if you could speak more about the process of working backwards with artworks. You talked a little bit earlier about the materials and your whole process of preservation in terms of like honoring the decay and the condition of the work. And I wonder if you could speak to more of that working backwards. Like, what's it like finding an artwork, not knowing what it is, and trying to make sense of that? Sonia, I had the privilege of visiting Poinciana Paper Press last week, and I saw some of the evidence of the salvaging you do in terms of work adjacent to tourism. So thinking about the press and all of the symbols that are produced and discarded. And I wondered if you could speak to that. And lastly, Natalie, I wondered if you could also speak to just working as an editor and thinking about archives in the Caribbean and making that digestible and accessible for people in a modern sense.
Great questions. Thank you.
You could start.
Sure. I also want to say, Simone, that I loved that your exhibition was like created from a book from the archives on straw work, and that it had a connection to your family. Like when you talk about the magical moments, my brain went to that. So good. Like the archives are places of very interesting magical moments. Thank you. Yeah, that's something that at the press too. This was what I had forgotten to talk about earlier when my brain leapt over. But the other like magical moment, and this relates to kind of the work of salvaging, Simone, that you referenced. So Poinciana Paper Press is a space for writing, book arts, and publishing, and it's a space that works with primarily like a lot of analog stuff. So I'm a professional, right? Probably you could have guessed from the way I was like, I'm leaving social media soon. But so I have like letterpress printing machines and movable type, which is the way that things were produced and printed before photocopiers and printers and spirit duplicators and mimeographs. And I'm just going to keep going back, right? And so like all of the equipment that I have and that we use at the press is really from somewhere else, because these things aren't getting made anymore. I mean, there are places, I should say, like Skyline Type Foundry, and I think the Monotype Corporation are still casting type out of the lead alloy or wood. Yeah, there are some folks who are keeping that alive. But like in terms of the machines, it's really all about maintenance now, right? And restoring, really restoring. And that has been a journey through the press, because like I said, you can imagine I really like to handle a drill. I don't feel like I'm a very mechanical person either. But you kind of have to be a little bit of a mechanic to work with these machines, you know? But what's kind of cool about them is that once you just like oil it up and take that rust off and replace the right type of spring, there are people where you can get the spring from, and you need to know about it. It'd be running, you know? They're like really durable. Yeah. So I have, I work with someone locally. His name is Tevin Williams, and he's been really helpful. He works with like aviation mechanics or something, and so he understands like what the machine side of it is, and I understand what the machine is supposed to do, like artistically. And so when we get together, and he's a man who listens to women, and that's very helpful. And then we can restore things. So I've restored book presses with him. He's helped me to dismantle and move really heavy equipment. He's helped to like restore my paper beater, you know, and I feel like that's a really critical part. Like that's when you said that we're in service to our like the art, like I feel very in service to the equipment that I have at the press, and they have their own histories. So like one of the machines and a lot of the type comes from the Craftsman Press, which was a press that was independently owned and operated by Oscar Johnson Sr. and his wife Sylvia in the downtown area. And some of the presses are also from the Greek Orthodox Church. There was like a whole print shop operation going on in there. So I have some typing presses from the Greek Orthodox Church as well, and I've had donations from Florida University, from Kendra, Tampa. Yeah, Kendra has helped to facilitate some type donations and equipment donations, and some other folks as well. So it's like an act of just like getting things from places and sometimes donations. But the Craftsman Press is interesting because this is the magical point I wanted to make earlier. When I first was working with the Johnson family and moving some of the type out of the old print shop, or the second location of the old print shop, because the first one burned down. It's a very interesting story behind that. But anyway, that's for later. That came across this drawer that had these cuts, and these are like blocks with like, instead of movable type, it has like images, and the images were old logos of like commercial spaces or cultural spaces, yeah, that don't exist anymore. So like Blackbeard's Tavern, which was a restaurant, the Cat and the Fiddle, which was like a really amazing sort of nightclub, the Silver Slipper, the Montague Beach Hotel, the Emerald Beach Hotel. So all of these just like great vintage looking logos, you know, from these places that don't exist anymore. And I thought, well, this is pretty cool. I know about a couple of these, but I don't know about all of them. The Nassau Magazine, Nassau Wear, there's a horse owning license for Hobby Horse Hall, really, really interesting stuff. And I printed a few of them, and I was like taking them out to fairs. And the magical moment came when people started telling me their stories about these spaces, you know. So because we live in a space that's so defined by tourism, it means that we are having this lecture in a hotel space. And like all of our lives are lived through these spaces. Like your proms are going to be at a hotel, your graduations, weddings, you're going to meet people different places. You're going to probably work in these spaces. You know, this is a service, quote unquote, service industry. And so people were coming up to me saying, oh my gosh, my parents met there. They both work there. And then they're just telling me this incredible story. And this is what I'm talking about when I said like that archiving happens in that like the human story level. It's not like just like, oh, this person threw the mace out of the window. It's like sometimes, you know, not sometimes, but history is also like these two ordinary people meeting at this hotel and what that meant for you existing now, you know? Yeah.
Did you want to go next?
Yeah. So yeah. Yeah. You know, this is interesting. Just thinking about epistemology and
Right.
the study of knowledge. Whose knowledge is,
Historiography.
whose knowledge is like good or bad or
Right.
like, you know, genuine, etc. Valuable. But yeah, so I recently restored, but conserved like this oil painting. So I'll use that as an example. A lot of times my approach to the work, and this is like generally conservatives' approach in general, is the first thing you need to, and to your point, like a lot of the work is like working backwards sometimes, and a lot of it is like dealing with problems that exist because there were ways of doing things that people just kept doing, like the use of oil paint, the use of certain varnishes that people are correcting now. So a lot of conservation practice is in correcting people using bad practices in the past, right? Exactly. So like tape and all these different things. So a lot of times, like when you approach a piece and like the heart to conservation is connected to chemistry. So it's like knowing the material, understanding how the material reacts to certain things, oxidization, all these different like modes. So in kind of like local context, in like, you know, a cultural, like, you know, Caribbean context, a lot of the materials we're using is like new age kind of like materials, but it's often being used in not the proper form, if that makes sense. So like people are using oil paints, but they don't understand like using something like sunflower and linseed oil could exasperate mold eating it in the future,
Or
right?
discoloration later.
Exactly. Or like they're making oil paintings, but they're not giving it enough time to dry it completely, then varnish it. So like a lot of the things that I'm seeing is just lack of information and
Because people have to do it themselves.
yeah, and then also lack of access to information, you know. A lot of times people learn by just doing and making mistakes, which is fine. So a lot of the stuff that come in contact with have been pieces that are basically, you know, are being, it's kind of just evidence of people just being like ignorant to certain practices. And they're ignorant to those practices because they're like very European centered. Like if you didn't go off to school just to learn specifically how to use these oil paints, you're going to do
And they don't teach
things.
you that in art school either. They don't teach you about conservation when you're doing an art degree.
Exactly.
Just saying.
So a lot of the pieces I've seen has that. So the approach I usually take is like obviously you need to know like how valuable this piece is. Because depending on how valuable it is, you need to carry it somewhere else, right? And when I say carry it somewhere else, like you have to take that into consideration and asking someone to conserve the piece. So oftentimes you have to take into consideration, I mentioned earlier, like the materials that was used, the artist, the stretcher that it's on. Is the stretcher that is on the original stretcher? Because the provenance of the piece, the history of the piece, all that gives value and kind of like this history that you can kind of like replace once you change those things, right? And also like are you changing this going to affect how people research this piece later? Like, are you making proper documentation? Is this documentation something
Like the
being
provenance
handed,
kind of-
yeah, handed off to the person, the painting that you're restoring the person for? So these are the things that I think about. I know one of the things, the challenges again in this space is mold. And oftentimes you have to think about just the surface mold, but more like inside the painting, the pocket where people are storing it, etc. So there's different ways of me like approaching it. And I go back to the example of me restoring this recent painting. This painting that I restored recently is a horse. It's a Spanish artist. I don't remember the exact name. No, this is not from the collection. This is a private collector. And this is another thing. This is a painting that's not locally done, but you have people bringing their collections to this space, right? And now it's getting problems, you know, or problems that it brought with it, but they've been exasperated by being in this environment, right? So, like understanding that, and this painting itself had really bad varnish, right? Which made the horse look yellow, and it's a white horse. So they now know that the horse is white, right? Because that process is removing the varnish. It needed a new frame because it was eaten by, you know, termites. The canvas needed like backing to support it. So it's like these different steps, right? And then also thinking about works that local people have made that I've like cleaned, right? A lot of artists in the space use acrylic. And acrylic is great in a lot of ways, but it's also bad because it's quote unquote like plastic, and quote unquote plastic is bad, right? Even though, fun fact, I don't know how real it is, but they recently discovered mold that now eats plastic.
They're like they're trying to do things like help with microplastics,
Yeah,
especially. So it's like
So
fungi.
yeah. So and oftentimes in like in conservation, they often talk about the problems as they call it with plastics, as in the problems of people using acrylic paint, because their understanding is that, and conservation is heavy on the what do you call it, the
Being able to
oil
reverse it.
paints and marble and
Yeah.
ceramics, these things that are like traditional,
yeah.
you know, because in a lot of ways they're reversible. So in conservation, you always think of like reversing like damage, right? Oil is reversible. You could throw something on an oil painter and get it back down to a molecular structure where it's malleable,
Right,
and you
right.
could fix it. You can't do that with acrylic.
No.
once it's plastic,
Right.
it's set. That's it, quote unquote, forever, right? You can't throw something on an acrylic painting, it'll just mush into nothing. But with oil, you have a level of control, right? So that's why Conservation Day often champion the use of oil, traditional materials. Marble exists now because it's marble.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So making a
I mean,
sculpture.
it existed before it was a sculpture, right?
Exactly. So a lot of times, like thinking of it from that perspective kind of dictates it's different for each piece. But the process is almost like an art form in and of itself. You have a lot of conservators that are like heavy in the chemistry, and then they go into the art side of it, like they learn how to paint, right? To fix, or you run into the issue with the lady who knows really well about chemistry, it seems, but she didn't have for lack of a better
Was
word,
this talent?
yes,
Right. Right.
the talent to actually paint.
Particular skill set, the specific.
Yeah, the specific skill set, right? Whereas someone like me, I'm coming from it from the reverse,
Right.
as in like
You're an artist.
I
Who's
have,
learning about it.
I'm an artist being into conservation, so all the chemistry side is like I'm catching with,
Right.
as opposed to the other way around.
But ironically, you already know how the material works.
Yeah, because
You're just learning on
yeah,
the molecular level,
exactly.
but you already have the task.
Exactly. So yeah, so a lot of times it's like it's thinking about all these things because all of this is important, to the actual work itself. So it changes case by case. Yeah.
Makes sense. And just to keep it super simple, because I know I think we're all at the end of the talk, I know. But essentially, I guess like the way that I think about like archive and sort of, I think about it, I guess, as like conserving culture, preserving culture in a certain sense. And anytime I'm like editing work by people, I just try to make sure that they tie like the cultural context in as much as possible, because we've had so many people speak about our space. We're not us. So I just want more Caribbean people to say with our own words what we think of our space and what we think of our history, how we tie our history into everything. That's kind of the main thing. It's just like, why should people find this important? Because we know why. I just want that to be translated. And I think that's kind of what it is for archive, for artwork, for writing, for most things, I think, for me. So yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you for those questions. Okay. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for bearing with us. Thank you for letting us yap. Much appreciated. And thank you to the current for having us. Much love you all. Thank you.